Hi everybody!
In this day and age, it seems we're constantly bombarded with the message turn-based combat is dead, or it's outdated. The journalists and YouTubers who state this are going off the fact it supposedly doesn't appeal to a younger demographic, which really holds no water. For example, Pokemon is still one of the largest gaming franchises out there despite it having many flaws. Admittedly, Pokemon has mass appeal to both children and adults to some degree. It always has. Also, if you look at the best-selling games in the franchise, it's always the mainline games, which are, you guessed it, always turn-based combat, so clearly it's not as antiquated as people think. In fact, I'd argue turn-based games are having a renaissance of sorts. Atlus always makes waves when they release a new Shin Megami Tensei title or a new Persona game. And unless we're talking about a Persona spin-off, those are always turn-based. SMT is always turn-based as well. Also, just looking at Metaphor ReFantazio, the brand new IP from Atlus, that's going to do hybrid combat. So we just started talking about it. Let's dive a bit deeper. We also have an indie darling from last year with Sea of Stars. That's all well and good, but generally speaking, indie games don't dictate where the market goes, as they appeal to a very niche audience most of the time. So what about bigger budget games? Well, on that front, you have Atlus, like I previously mentioned, and you have studios like Larian Games with titles like Divinity or Baldur's Gate 3. Obviously, that's a different kind of turn-based combat, but it's still turn-based. For a lot of people claiming turn-based combat is dead, they point to companies like Square Enix not exactly pushing the genre super hard. But even that doesn't hold any water, as they still have games with this style of combat. For example, they've got things like the Dragon Quest series, Live Alive, and even the first two Octopath Traveler games, so that doesn't exactly hold up. Even Sega has gone turn-based with the Yakuza games, which were formerly brawlers, so we're actually seeing a resurgence of turn-based combat from all levels of gaming, not just indie and AA studios. It should also be noted these games are selling pretty well and are generally beloved by those who play them. They also appeal to people of all ages, even if their core audience is probably 80s and 90s kids who grew up with them. If those individuals stuck to the genre, then chances are they're showing not only the classics they grew up with, but also modern examples with their own kids or the younger people in their lives if they don't have any. This will of course mean some of those kids will get into turn-based games. Not all of them will, but a lot will, which will set up turn-based combat for generations to come. Also, the gaming industry is going through a very massive change where indie games very well might take over, and there will be less of a focus on just these big-budget experiences. If you've been paying attention to the gaming industry of late, it has been noted huge-budget cinematic games are no longer commercially viable, as these companies are operating on razor-thin budgets, meaning these games have to hit it out of the park just to turn a profit, whereas smaller budget, more bite-sized experiences are required to plug the holes in between huge releases. This is something that makes turn-based combat rather good. You can make it super basic and give it a shoestring budget, and it's still a decent enough experience. But if you throw some budget at it and incorporate a ton of features like the Persona games, you'll get something that satisfies the itch for bigger budgeted cinematic games. There's literally a game for everyone in this genre. Another point I see brought up frequently is a lack of innovation within the genre. This is a harder to quantify point because gaming as a whole has reached a stage where most ideas are iterative. The real change comes down to how the package is put together. If you use the logic of lacking innovation, then gaming is dying as a whole. If we really look at gaming, video games are always iterative until someone experiments a little bit with different ideas from different genres and tries to put them together in new and interesting ways. This is how real innovation happens. This is also partially what makes games like The Legend of Heroes, Trails Through Daybreak, and Metaphor such interesting games. At their cores, they are still both turn-based RPGs, but they're incorporating some aspects of action gameplay to keep the grinding aspect of the game more engaging. However, you can always opt to go for turn-based anyways, which allows the player to customize the experience more to their liking. Hybrid combat isn't exactly a new concept. Even Final Fantasy has tried to tackle this with Final Fantasy VII Remake and Rebirth, though they go about it in an entirely different manner. since those games are at their core action titles that go somewhat turn-based when casting spells, which feels clunky to me even though I still like Final Fantasy VII Remake. I'll be diving deeper into Rebirth at a later date, I just haven't had time yet. But there's definitely innovations happening, it's just most of them are iterative on previous ideas and haven't transformed into wholly new mechanics yet. Or they're incorporating ideas from different subgenres and haven't found the winning formula. So again, this is kind of a disingenuous thought process. If you feel like turn-based combat is heading for a golden age, then hit the subscribe button. Another thing I hear a lot of people claiming turn-based combat dead saying a lot is the fact these games are button mashy and require no thought process at all. This isn't exactly the case. If you're playing a game at the right difficulty for you, then it's going to require you to do more than just hammer away on the confirm button. That's as brain dead as me saying all action games are too simple, as you're just smashing away at the attack and dodge buttons. It's rarely that simplistic. Some games are just designed to be as simple as possible so you don't spend too long engaging with the mechanics, and just move on with the storyline. Other games revel in the mechanics at the expense of story. Some games get the balance right, and the narrative and mechanics work in conjunction. It all depends on what the developer intends. But if you find a game is far too button mashy, or you're just mashing one button without thinking, chances are you need to raise the difficulty. For example, I find for the Erebonian arc of the Trails games, starting on hard is the right difficulty for me, as normal is just too easy and Nightmare is balanced for New Game Plus. They aren't as hard as the Sky games or the Crossbell duology. The same goes for the Persona games now that I'm used to how those play. The normal difficulty is just a bit too easy, but generally speaking, turn-based games aren't as button mashy as people think. Hit the like button if you agree. So, are turn-based games dead? Nah, they really aren't. The games I mentioned prove that point. The people claiming they're dead are either not fans of the genre or websites like ING that are just looking to get clicks. Just look at how they handled their recent news about Metaphor being an Xbox exclusive.
Well, would you look at that? A rare instance where Colin's illiterate. It's IGN, you dumbass, not ING. Anyway, so it's articles like that as to why people don't take sites like Kotaku and Polygon and IGN seriously, is because they would rather type something up like that to get rage bait people into clicking on their articles than actually, report on stuff in a fair manner like they're fucking supposed to.
That's really fucking embarrassing. Anyways, comment on if you think turn-based games are dying or not. Thanks go out to my current channel members, R. Campbell and Dani Boy. If you'd like to help the channel further and get exclusive content, click the join button or the link in the description. Check out my video on why you need to support Metaphor ReFantasio. Until next time, keep blazing that trail.